Hello, everybody. Welcome to our ENCO webinar about making radio accessible. We've just opened it up here, so the attendees will be filtering in. We're going to give it a few seconds to let the list of attendees populate, but thank you for everyone who's been carving out some time in their calendar to make this webinar. This is kind of some interesting stuff we're going to talk about, some new territory here, some new ideas. So I'm particularly excited about that, and that our guest as well that's going to be with us. So I'm just watching the list get a little longer here. So just a minute. And I'm Bill Bennett with ENCO Systems. And if you guys are, whoever you are, most of you are actually in radio, so you've probably heard of us a couple of times. Um, and okay, it looks like the list is stabilizing. So now let's get going. Again, thanks for joining us. This is our webinar about making radio accessible with captioning. And put on your seatbelt, it might be kind of fun. Here's kind of the breakdown or the agenda. We hope to keep this in about 30 minutes, might go a little bit longer. Really, it depends on your Q&A. We don't have an end date to it, really. It could go on for 3 or 4 days. I've only got about 200 slides, so it won't be that long. By the way, this webinar is going to be recorded. So when you have some questions that you may want to ask, first thing, please use the Q&A button. Not best to use the chat, but actually use the Q&A. That makes it easier for us to manage the questions. And so we will possibly, quite likely, in fact, read your question. So that may be used in the recording later, just so you know. And as if you're new to the Zoom interface, and very few of you probably are new to it, you probably know that you can resize windows and move them around a little bit. So you might need to do that depending on how you have your screen set up. We do have a lot of slides, so not 200, I promise. So we're going to talk about accessibility in radio, though, and then a great example at WAMU, an NPR station in Washington, D.C., from Rob Bertrand there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why captioning for radio. There's a lot of reasons. And then we're going to talk about a product that ENCO has that particularly can help with that. A little bit of product demonstration, not too long or wonky, I promise, and then Q&A and a wrap up. So today we've got a couple of participants. That's me, Bill Bennett, and then also Rob Bertrand with WAMU 88.5 in Washington, D.C. And then also Matt Walther, our product manager here at ENCO Systems. He might jump in to add some things as well. So a little bit about captioning, first of all. Captioning in radio, or radio for those who are hard of hearing or deaf, does seem sort of oxymoronic historically, right? Because radio is spoken word. And if you have trouble hearing or can't hear, you can't enjoy radio at all. So there's some interesting statistics about hearing loss just in the United States. About 15% of American adults, 37.5 million, age over 18, report trouble hearing. And there's, let's see, it's between ages and 60 to 69 is where they get a greater amount of hearing loss. That makes sense for all aging and getting older, which is to say hearing loss is also going to be a growing problem, a growing condition that most of us are going to be experiencing if we're lucky to live longer. Gallaudet University there in Washington, D.C. estimates that about 2 to 4 out of every 1,000 people in the United States are functionally deaf. And I think you can probably imagine they're probably not listening to radio. So, and there's a lot of material that's out there in radio that they can't enjoy. So, spoken word radio, especially, of course, music as well. Although I know some deaf people can actually hear music and enjoy it by feel, but it's much harder to just enjoy an interview of a newsmaker or something like that, or an interesting story that they can't hear. We all know television has been captioning for decades. The FCC requires it, and it started requiring it a couple of decades ago. ENCO's been in that business since about 2005, and we've learned a lot about speech recognition. And also we've been in radio for even longer. So we're kind of looking at, we finally realized there's some connection here, and we're not the only ones. But so we've learned some things from TV, and we hope to learn some things as we move this, make this something that can be useful for radio. Because captioning will make it more accessible. One example is a radio station, WAMU, there, like I said, in Washington, D.C., that have, when their new head of engineering came on board, noticed that not only are they in the major news market, they have a higher percentage of deaf or hard of hearing people in the DC area. And a great deal of that is because of Gallaudet University, which is a world-renowned university for the deaf and hard of hearing. And so Rob thought, well, there's something we can do here. What is it? And he started to think about it and do some research and came up with a solution. And I would like to put those into his words. So, and by the way, Rob, I should have introduced you by a wave earlier. There you are. Thanks for waiting. But Rob, I mean, so it's funny. I joined ENCO about 3 years ago and started thinking about a few months later, because my background also spans radio and television. So this captioning thing could be maybe useful elsewhere, but I never really had a specific way to implement that. And it ends up you were actually doing that already and thinking about that and then did something. Do you mind talking about that a bit, please?
Sure. We're really lucky here at WAMU to have a talk show host named Kojo Nnamdi, who today is doing just one show a week that is actually called the Politics Hour on Fridays. Prior to that, he was doing a show for 5 days a week, most recently for an hour that ran from noon to 1. And Kojo's been a fixture in the DC community for decades. He actually started on television in the 60s. And everybody knows Kojo. He is a fixture on the political circuit for local politics in DC. So, of course, DC is the home of the center of national and to some extent international politics, to a large extent international politics. But the local political scene in DC does not get much national attention because, usually DC is thought of as this monolithic place that only exists, often to be railed against by one political party or another. But there are people who live here, who care about their community, who want to be part of their community and serve their community. At WAMU, we really exist at the intersection of all of that. And Kojo, in particular, has been part of that for many, many, many years, starting with his career on television at WHUT here in DC. He was also part of WHUR and joined WAMU. I should know this off the top of my head. I want to say around 1990, because I think we celebrated 30 years last year. I should really remember this, so please forgive me, Kojo. In any case, over the decades, really built up a reputation as being the place to go if you were announcing your candidacy for local office in DC. And it just so happened that a couple of years ago, as Bill mentioned, Gallaudet University, which is a university that exists for the hearing impaired here in DC, that I can't remember if he was a recent graduate or a current student of Gallaudet, was running for local office here in DC. And just like all other local politicians or candidates for office here in DC, he too wanted to make his stop on the Kojo Nnamdi show. And he did. However, we had no standard way to reach his core audience of hearing impaired people. And we did, for the purpose of that very special show, provide closed captioning via a live captioner. But it really kind of brought to light the fact that that was not something that we offered on a regular basis. And even the fact that we were able to deliver that for that one show created a need for any number of people to start asking the question, hey, we know that radio doesn't really have a screen, but of course the internet is a screen. We know you could do this if you really wanted to. Maybe you should consider doing this. And so I think that was just a really interesting question to solve. A bunch of us, started kicking it around thinking, yeah, there's any number of options that are out there. I actually knocked on the door of my friends at NPR and said, hey, you all tend to think about these sorts of big picture, sorts of community service kinds of things. Have you ever thought about closed captioning your audio products? And they said, actually, a couple of years ago, we did. And the project never really got off the ground, but we started talking to the folks at ENCO. And there's something there. Y'all should start talking to the folks at ENCO, and you might be able to come up with something. And so, sure enough, we did. The biggest challenge was, well, how do we get the captions to display? And this is where I'm really glad that I have a smart team of technologically diverse professionals on my team here at WAMU, because, you know, my first reach was, well, I guess we could just stream live video of a CG device that was just scrolling captions over a black screen. That would certainly be a proof of concept that we could do. It would not be terribly efficient in terms of bandwidth. But we know that out of the box, we could do something there. And one of my colleagues started poking around at what the ENCO and Caption box had available. And through his own ingenuity and no doubt with a little bit of help from Google, patched together some code from a couple of different repositories that he located to convert those WebSockets into an iframe. And we started presenting this as an iframe. And, you know, in particular with Bill's help, we were able to refine the vocabulary in Caption over time. That's an ongoing process. It started off a little crude, as I think anything that, you know, you're learning at the very beginning does. And today is really largely quite accurate. So, you know, as I know that Bill will show later in this presentation, today on WAMU.org, we are presenting full-time captions of our live audio stream. We haven't yet made it to the second leg of this, which we see using the enCaption data to drive human edited transcripts. So, you know, right now, if you write into us and ask for a transcript of our national show 1A, we will have partners at a different firm generate a human edited transcript of that show for you. Now, the reality is that they're probably using some technology, it could even be enCaption, to get the first draft of those captions done. And then they have a set of transcriptionists that go in and edit that. So our hope is that beyond this, we'll actually be using enCaption to drive our transcription service as well, which will then be human edited by transcriptionists offsite, and give us a little bit of economy of scale that we've already done the first heavy lift of getting to that point. We would likely only do that for our local programming, because doing it for all of the national programming that we carry as well would be a little bit too heavy of a lift. But regardless, we do carry captions of all of our programming, local or national, via the Caption Live page on WAMU.org that you're seeing right now. We do still consider this to be a beta release, as it is titled here, but we have made good progress in making this more and more reliable in terms of its accuracy, and more stable in terms of its total uptime, because of course there is another middle layer of software here that we developed in-house to convert that WebSocket. It's not very heavy, but to convert that WebSocket to the iframe that you're seeing on the page. And so occasionally we run into, you know, just normal computer stability things, and we'll need to log in and, you know, give our own application a kick. But this, by and large, has been a great experiment, and it's something that we are looking to maintain as a permanent part of what we do.
Man, that's cool, because it's what's fun is looking at these captions now, and as you can see, I'm just selecting some of it. You know, I could even copy it off of this and put it onto a clipboard if I didn't try doing that before, so I'm just kind of playing around. Sorry, whoops, distraction. But no, thanks for
impressive, for example, that you see Uber and Lyft spelled correctly in that caption.
Yeah, and it's tricky, you know, because our software too, especially with spoken word, unlike television, where you may have a secondary pathway where you've got visual, then you've got oral, and then captions. Here, if you're hard of hearing or deaf, you only have one. You have just the captions, which makes us even more focused on just the words and the accuracy, which, as I'll show a little bit later with their product, means that, as Rob was saying, and thank you, Rob, I've been trying to get in there and make additions and corrections for when our system thinks it's hearing words that are spelled differently. Kind of a simple example, not quite in situ here, but like the name Chris Kane, is that spelled with a K or a C, both of those words, right? There's ways you can correct for that. So, and I'll get to showing that. Rob, if you'd like, if you're good, I'm going to jump back into kind of explaining a little bit more about captioning for radio in general, but and why I think it's important. But please jump in at any
Sure.
time, and you too, Matt, who's lurking in the background. Um, but let's see. It looks like I'm sharing back to my slides here. I always like to double check because on Zoom, there's really not a confidence feed, so to speak, to be sure. There we go. Okay. So yeah, why caption for radio, right? Besides sounding crazy and insane when you go to your board and say, hey, we're going to caption radio. They're like, wait, wrong room. So most importantly, I think, honestly, personally, captioning for radios is good for those who can't hear very well or are hard of hearing. It's just, therefore, I think it's a personal opinion that it's doing the right thing, but that's usually not enough reason to do anything. You got to have more than that. There's a business reason behind these things too, of course. And whenever you spend money, you have to have that. Well, in radio, that means I think you can grow to reach a larger audience and grow market share. There's a reality there. Like Rob was saying, our system generates transcripts whenever it's captioning. So they may not be word perfect, but they're awfully close to high accuracy, mid to high 90s, and that's a great place to start if you want to get final transcripts, or at least just have raw transcripts of all the dialogues that were said, and it saves them as simple text files. So there's also a couple of external influences in the overall accessibility world that mostly has been focused on TV and television and video captioning, but is kind of, I don't know why it hasn't frankly looked at radio more recently. We'll get to those kind of areas next. Well, and I'll mention the National Association for the Deaf and the Americans with Disabilities Act are two things. I know the enCaption product, especially for video and television most recently, and that is, of course, a regulated space. The FCC, by the way, of course, in radio, you all know, has no influence at all. So that's a really, unlike television, that's not regulated. So, and I have these kind of points here that the National Association for the Deaf, or NAD, wants for television, but it's reasonable to assume that they'd love to see this for radio too, right? Television news could be scripted on a teleprompter, and you could throw that prompter script on a website if you wanted. But what about emergency and late breaking news or live interviews? Those things aren't on a teleprompter; they're live, and so you need to either schedule a human to caption them right away as they happen, or have a technology that you can turn on right away and let it take care of that. So for now, this is television world that they're looking at, but it might evolve to radio. There's some interesting other things going on with lawsuits. There's certainly a lot of litigious activities that have been going on for captioning for video, and specifically even online video, because again, the FCC does not regulate what's going on on over the top or streaming either, by the way. So, but the great example here, I've got three examples. Harvard and MIT both have been sued. Because the NAD cited that they lacked captions for their lectures and course material and podcasts, or I would think vodcasts, on their website. So they had to add captions to them. Certainly somebody we're very familiar with, NPR. They were sued by a New York law firm because their videos that they had weren't captioned. And some other, so not just the NAD that made file suits, but individuals or firms too. So things to keep watch out. This other case back in 2014, Netflix, and also differently Amazon under a different suit were sued under the ADA because their videos weren't captioned. Now, good luck trying to find a video on Netflix or Amazon that isn't captioned. So, and again, that's video, and it's absolutely made for captioning, that you can embed captions. I have a little bit of history coming up. So sorry, you're getting a whole lesson here on captioning, not just radio and captions. So the history of captioning is very interesting, I think. It started over 100 years ago with stenography and literally creating a permanent paper copy of proceedings in a courtroom. Captioning itself, generally stenography machines use a different kind of keyboard layout. It's evolved over the years, but it's not the QWERTY keypad we're used to seeing. It's based on phonetics. It even supports multi-touch, which is something that is, it didn't just start with smartphones. And way back in 1906, a teenager invented this, the modern stenography device while he was taking a class for shorthand and was a court reporter. And that thing is hard to use. When you watch people who are doing live stenography of a court session, they are just very focused and very manually. It's arduous. I can barely type, so let alone hear something and type what I'm hearing. There's a great photo of an old school stenography machine and being used there, but then the new ones have Wi-Fi and SD cards. But as you can see, that's not a QWERTY keypad. And that little screenshot is just the output. It's again phonetic. I can't tell you what that says right there, but it's definitely so they obviously have some technology that goes and turns that into text when a human is captioning live television. So there's already some interesting cross data translations going on. Television originally started with captions that were, and way back on PBS, in fact, 1972. The French chef, it was captioned in post-production. So it was a recording that literally on, let me guess, 3/4 inch tape, or no, 2-inch tape, would record or play back a little bit, take the words that were said by someone, type those few lines into a chyron, and then rewind the tape and apply that as a lower third graphic, and then let that rest for, until the sentence or sentences are done, and do it again and again. Very arduous. Those are called open captions, burned onto the video permanently. You can't take them off. Then in 76, the FCC opened up vertical blanking line 21, which is an analog data space. It's analog, but you can throw some bits through that. Awfully low bit rate, but they worked with Gallaudet University and the National Bureau of Standards and ABC and on WETA. Now talk about collaboration. The Mod Squad had closed captions. And that closed captions, the difference is that's that data that you can then as a user or viewer turn on and off at your end, not permanently burned on like open captions. But in the end, closed captions pretty much look like open captions when they're turned on. And there's a couple standards, CEA or EIA 608 is analog, 708 is digital. That's all video stuff, so I want to bore you too much more. But it's just gone through some interesting evolutions, and now in digital television and SDI signals, it's really robust. There's a lot you can do with it. Strange little piece of information, the HDI cable will not pass caption data. If you ever wonder why you can't get captions through your HDMI cable at home, it's because it doesn't support it. So anyway, the modern AI-based system, we've really developed this AI speech engine to a broadcast-centric workflow, and broadcast television and broadcast radio in a certain way, certainly audio processing is no different. It has to be just as good, just as accurate, just as reliable. And hundreds of TV stations are using our product right now. Also government, from the Department of Defense to the FBI and other US government agencies, and banking uses it. Folks that have, because it's on-prem, by the way, they can keep these conversations and maybe some of these classified dialogues in a safe place without worrying about having to vet other people to record manually. Your broadcasts probably don't have to be that secure, but it's still interesting to point that out. Way back in 2005, when we came up with this, there was no AI-based neural network to do this with, so it was not so great, but now it's awfully good. It does two things, really. It works on two principles. One, our speech engine is listening to the speech and just understanding from the words what that, how it's probably spelled. Example, the word to, there's at least 3 ways to spell that word, right? How does it know which one to spit out, right? So that's the interesting thing. Then it uses statistical analysis on the grammar structure to find out which letter or which spelling, T-O, T-W-O, or T-O-O probably fits in that. Or if you read a book versus you painted your barn red, well, how do you spell that? It gets really smart that way. So that's one thing to look at with AI-based engines is how does it come up with this, how accurate and what does it do? Another factor when you look at is latency. Humans, the human workflow, typically, if you're watching broadcast television, by the way, that person captioning it, if they're human, they're probably at home in their kitchen or living room or home office doing it manually. The audio gets to them oftentimes without video at all. In fact, most times not video if they're out of market. And then they have a data connection back to the transmitter or to the broadcast production facility, and then it's uplinked. So there's a bit of delay in all that. So if you're captioning on premises with one box, that actually speeds things up pretty quick. With our product, 3 to 4 seconds normally is about the time. We also, there are cloud workflows for captioning. Our product can do it. Other products out there can do this in different businesses, but that's, again, adds more technical complexity and delay. So we like on-prem. Mind you, this whole conversation we're having, and Rob has been so patient in letting me babble, I'm not done, is we're taking a television product and moving it into radio, but it's still both voice. So it's a new product concept. We're learning. We'd love feedback from you. Any ideas that you've got, crazy or sublime to ridiculous. We need this information because it won't be ridiculous. It's like, oh, we didn't think of that. So it's new, and will evolve over time. And of course, we have radio products, and so we're looking at ways to merge these things, and in different ways. And so, if you use some of our DAD products, DAD-related products for automation or playout, you may have some other unique ideas or needs that we could probably customize towards. I'm going to bore you with three documents, three diagrams. If you're engineers, you'll like them. If not, apologies. This first diagram, I'm only showing it to you to say it's not this bad. This is a television-centric workflow. All the different ways you could take audio in and caption it, and transcriptions and open captions and closed captions, and embed it with SDI encoders inboard and outboard. The radio concept is a lot simpler than that. So if you'd like a PDF of that, just let me know and I can email you that. This is our current concept when it comes to radio. Simpler. I mean, audio can come in analog, XLR, AES3. I think, Rob, you've got XLR, analog, or you're not doing IP, I don't think, right?
Well, we actually are using IP, but we're translating it into AES before going into enCaption. But
okay,
it's coming out of an AES node on our Axial Live Wire system.
Oh, right on. So, and there's something that we could talk about later is we can talk to middleware app, like whatever Windows can talk to, we can talk to. So if there's a middleware app that speaks to any of these IP standards, we could install that in natively through that connect and free up some cabling. So, and so again, it's a Windows product, right? It's Windows based. It's Windows 10 Enterprise Edition. It's a reliable known entity right there. While it's captioning, it is again able to save these transcripts and also sidecar files. Sidecars are text transcripts for video editing applications. You can save any combination, but for radio, mostly you'll just probably want to save a simple sidecar file, transcript. That red arrow there is red for a reason. That's a piece of missing, that's a missing link that is different based on everyone's unique requirements. As Rob mentioned, his team had to come up with a way to take our data that is in our WebSocket that you can hit via an IP connection and translate it into something that can feed their iframe on their website. As you can imagine, there's a few links in that path. So the trick is taking our WebSocket code and converting it into what is compatible with your website template, with your website servers, and anything that may be in the middle along the way. So we're curious as to how you might want to adapt that in the marketplace, but also our product is evolving very nicely itself. So I think that's going to be something that we can work with more natively over time. But at this point, some code is needed there in the middle, definitely, and always will be, to make it display on your website. For example, you don't want 100 or 500 folks on your website looking at captions all coming from the enCaption machine. It couldn't handle that many web connections. It's not really made for that. So, but we have customers at sports venues using it to feed digital signage within the venue. That's that little lower right photo is we're captioning the NAB main stage. Remember NAB? Like last one was about 100 years ago. We set up monitors on both sides of the main stage, and we're captioning that all day, every day for the whole week while people were up there talking. And that's all that is just a direct audio feed of their lavalier mics feeding the enCaption engine. And we also built a proof of concept feeding smartphones. And actually that is Matt Walther's iPhone right there, Matt. So thank you for donating that for the test. But because it's HTML, we can adjust the font size, right? You can adjust the color, the size of it, the type of font. It's all very customizable. It's web text, so not too complicated. And so, and I was going to drill down a little bit for the Uber geeks in there. This is kind of how the speech engine works, right? Because we've got these custom libraries where you add custom names, custom words, your station call letters, stuff like that. And then the recognizer listens to it, and those custom words help it understand words that aren't otherwise in the English vocabulary already. Certainly examples of host names and sponsors, underwriters, stuff like that. We also have an offensive word list or block list, and those are profanity words, generally words thought to be offensive to most people. You can add words to that or take words out. So it depends on what kind of programming you do. Some words are in it that really aren't necessarily offensive, so it depends on your programming. And then we also have a filter list that we use to fix sort of bad words or mistakes in captioning and make them better. So, and I'll show you what those look like. real quick, just recapping though about before I go to give you a demo of it. Yes, our product 3 to 4 seconds latency. So if you're watching on the website, you'll see the captions before you'll hear the stream. The custom word lists and libraries are useful for customizing it. I should say it's a computer, right? It can run 24/7. There's no voice training, by the way. That's older speech to text technology. The AI stuff doesn't need it. Plus, our engine can also automatically inject punctuation and speaker change indication by chevrons if when it thinks it hears somebody else talking, which again, if you're deaf and you can't hear at all what they're saying, that at least helps give you a bit of a better idea when someone else is talking at one point or another. Our system also can work in file-based mode, not particularly useful for live radio, but it might be useful to caption a whole lot of recordings you've already got. You probably have tens or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years of recordings. You could actually run them through our system and create text file captions of them in very fast time, and then have actual transcripts of interviews that you've long forgotten about. And you can add those transcripts, sync them up back to your videos and or audio recordings, and find out all kinds of interesting things. I mentioned sync to videos just a second ago because these transcripts are pretty powerful. On the left, you see an example of our simple transcript format with timecode entries. Those timecode entries actually can be removed from there. So it is just simply the text itself. On the right side is one example of what's called those sidecar files I mentioned that you could marry back up with videos. Actually, in a video editing environment like Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro, there's nothing stopping you from taking the audio clip, like a 60-minute recording of an interview and a 60-minute long sidecar file, and marrying them together on the timeline and saving that as a video, just with a black background or a logo or something. And then you've got captioned video of your audio. That's kind of something neat I just thought of. Oh, time to show you how this thing works. Let me share this screen here. What we're doing now is actually logging into Rob's on-air system. So thank you, Rob, for letting us do this. So what the upper left corner is the actual captions as they're being sent out. Generally, that's called 3-line roll-up. That's more of a TV thing. That's why it's in 3 lines. The lower left is just a rolling log window of the captions that have been coming out. Now, if this were television, you would probably see the video depending on how it's set up in this square, but of course there's no TV for here. These audio indicators are useful because it helps you tune in the audio. If there's some low end rumble or high frequency noise, you would see that in the spectrograph. That helps you better understand maybe something you might need to filter out, just so it's useful for diagnostics. Real quick, there's this little setup window here. I know we're already 3 minutes late, so these are some settings you can change just to get things started, but generally once it's set and running, you don't need to change those. One of the cool things, and the source config is also kind of like that. This is a whole audio matrix. We can even caption from live streaming URLs too. So it doesn't have to be a physical audio connection. It could just be a live stream that we can caption from. Of course, there'd be a little delay in that because of the codecs, but the filters is something that, again, Rob was kind enough to point out and patient enough for me to get in there to do, because as you can see, we have up to what are called 3-word filters. They're all pattern matching. When you have on the left side, what you have on the left side is when it captions something out, sends out something that is not what you want. I don't want to call it a mistake because it could be the right word under certain conditions, but not always. So for example, like .org, do you really want the text in the website to say DOT space .org, or do you just want to be a dot and then org? These are ways that you can fix that. You can see here sometimes when people say WAMU, it doesn't quite understand how 4 letters are to be pronounced. So there are ways you can fix that with these filters. A lower down, I'll get way down to the 3-word filters, and you can see again it's more like pattern matching, again like W and then AM and the word U. Sometimes it has accidentally captioned that out. What we want that to say is, of course, just WAMU. And then I know my colleague Matt has been very busy, and back when COVID really was getting to be a thing last year, initially names like Anthony Fauci certainly weren't part of the vocabulary of the system. And so we added filters into all of our customers so that when they talked about Anthony Fauci on the news, it would properly spell that out. So I'm trying to, there's one more example of Anthony Fauci that was interesting. Yeah, there we go. So again, sometimes it Anthony Fau and then Chief, it thought it heard. But again, you just do this little correction here, and it's properly going to send out Dr. Fauci's properly spelled name. So, so that's filters in a nutshell. That's really all it is. The system can be turned on and off with automation. GPIs, GPOs, they can also be controlled by remote control through an API that we have. And we also have this calendaring or scheduling system that you can use to automate when it comes and goes, turns on and turns off. And that's assuming you don't want to, unless you want to caption 24/7. That's easy to do. Then just leave it running. So let me switch back to the presentation slides here. And as I'm breezing through here, oh, right. So last thing, we talked about data translation, and what you're looking at here is just on the right side is all the code that is needed. That's a full, I know you can't read that, but that is the entire HTML and JavaScript code to look at captions from our WebSocket directly to a page, to a web page, or an iframe, same thing. So not a lot of code there. On the left in the green text is just some excerpts of it. Obviously, to connect to an intermediary server through some middleware or data translation, you'd need something a little more customized depending on your situation, but there's not a whole lot to it. So I don't know, Rob, do you have nightmares or dreams of JavaScript and HTML in your at 3 a.m?
Thankfully not. Thankfully, that's somebody else's problem. But Rachel just asked the question, was it, does it have to go to a link on our website or could it go elsewhere? And of course, it's up to us in terms of what we build. Our plan, such as plans are, especially in this time of COVID, shifting everything all the time, is that when we go through our next redesign of our player on our website, if you even look at that page that is displaying the captions, we have what we call a persistent player that appears at the bottom of every page of our site. And our goal is to embed the captions there. But that has not been, really feasible for this proof of concept. And as we've been dealing with all the other things that have come up via COVID, that has not made it far enough up the design stack at this point. But it is an intention. And you can imagine all the other places that we might be able to deliver those captions to. Rachel, I think you also asked about, streaming players. We've wondered the same thing. Have not really started dreaming, let alone making that concrete yet. But yes, those are good questions. And certainly anything is possible with enough development.
Right. And one thing I should have mentioned too is a lot of stations have custom apps now. It's easy to add some integration into that app. I say it's easy, like as if I could do this. I don't know how to code for that, but to bring in a data stream, a text stream, and implement it into one, to a screen on that app should be fairly simple, I would think. It's just text. It's not too much of a payload. And also, I know some of you could definitely be curious, all of you, about pricing. We're working on trying to figure out how to make it affordable. So in these conversations, it's probably better if we had a better understanding of what each of you might want to use. How much do you need to use it? It's difficult because television and radio are different applications. So it's kind of an ongoing thing that we're trying to figure out what works. Oh, and Michael, you asked about on-air captions. Let me share this page again. I'm going to go back to the switching over to the WAMU page. Now I'm going to scroll up because I did see a speaker change a minute ago. And by the way, there's a threshold setting, so you can make it more or less sensitive. That's telling the speech engine when. So you got to have a bit of it's like it runs 1 to 10. There's 10 increments. Oop, I think I just went by something. Every time so there's a okay, whoop. This is like fishing. It's like, where's the fish? Actually, at this point, it's easier to call up maybe a transcript of it, but because every time I scroll up there we go. So there's a it wants to keep adding lines, so this is why it's jumping. But you can see victory for the Republicans, and then a Democratic incumbent to the right of that is those 2 chevrons indicating that it thinks somebody else is talking. They're now also in the center. You can see a question mark. Oh, lost it. Actually, I'm not good at fishing, so this is the same thing. I'm actually going to switch now to the actual feed from Rob's enCaption unit, because that's a little slower. And I'm just looking up here to see if there's any. There's a period halfway up after the word government. You can see there that it's inserting when it thinks somebody finished the sentence. And the AI is using just natural speech tones. Upspeak is usually a question mark, a pause, typically a comma, fairly an end of a sentence, usually downspeak into a period. It's not perfect, but it helps to give an indication. And the speaker change is also similar. If I were to start speaking an octave up in falsetto, it would think I'm someone else, and also a terrible singer. So that is something that I don't want to do, but it would show that as well. So as a speaker change. So hopefully that helps a little bit, Michael. Yeah, and Rachel, lyrics, that's fun. We're not aware of an AI out there yet that can caption singing, because singing is rhyming and it's sing-songing, and of course there's music. We're really surprisingly good with music in the background. If it's instrumental, news stations do this pretty often. If they can't give us a mix minus of just their microphones, we may just have to caption off their program feed. But then it's just voice on top of a music bed that's instrumental. That's not typically a problem unless the music's really loud. But if you've got singing, it won't be able to caption that. And that's where if you have, what's great about NPR, there's these things called pies, right? These clocks on the wall that everyone stares at, and you know exactly how it's programmed. And I say NPR because lots of other stations, commercial stations, also have these as well. Everything is generally very programmed these days. So you can, to the minute, have our system turn on and turn off as needed. If you have certain points or hours where you have song material. You could even, however, tie it into a GPO coming off your audio console, so that when you have play out taking place, playing music, you can turn it off. And when a mic opens up and the music is off, then it can turn the caption back on. So you can have some intelligence in that system so that it really captions only when, or mostly only when you have spoken word coming out. So it's just kind of a thought there that just comes to mind. Anyway, and Rob, I don't know, that's something that we could talk about too, kind of like how to integrate to your broadcast control system and make the captions more intelligent and more more reactive to exactly what the programming is at the time. But yeah, and also if anyone else has any more questions, please let them flow through. And the next slide actually has my email on it. But I do want to kind of summarize. Well, obviously I sound like a salesperson talking about all these benefits, but it's true. More people can access your content if you caption it. And then as I mentioned earlier, when you start having these transcripts, not only do your listeners have access to transcripts of any of your interviews, you could feed things like search engines with that stuff. You can have reporters and editors have text searchable transcripts that can find or help them find certain words that were said in interviews more readily. So it really can make the edit room speed things up too, if you have captions for all of your audio recordings. And honestly, we'd love to hear ideas from you guys too, because we can take audio and voice specifically and turn it into captions. Where it goes from there, it's all up to the imagination. And Rob, thank you for using yours a couple of years ago. You've got a lot of folks, I guess I can't say listeners, right? But people who are, enjoying WAMU that couldn't otherwise do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so everyone else, thank you. If you want to see this video again, we will be editing this. We're trimming it down, or actually probably not. It's not that long, and putting it on our website shortly. And let's see. And if you have any questions, certainly please email me there. And if you need to get a hold of Rob, he's allowed me to connect you if you needed to get a hold of him. If you have any questions for him. And we thank everyone for your time. I hope this is interesting. Hope it's opens the mind up to some possibilities. At least we hope. So, yeah. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. You have a good day, Washington, D.C. Don't get too cold over there.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.